I am a mother in a small rural town where silence passes for truth. My son vanished one February morning, and everyone agreed on the same story that he ran away. But grief sharpens listening, and over time, I began to hear what others refused to say aloud. Some answers don't come from words, they come from places that won't let you rest. The kettle hadn't started to whistle yet, but I could already feel the house listening. I stood in the kitchen, one hand resting on the counter, waiting for a sound that didn't come. No footsteps on the stairs, no bedroom door opening, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the winter light pressing against the windows like it wanted in. That was the first thing that felt wrong. The quiet wasn't natural, it was careful. His room was exactly as he'd left it the night before. The bed unmade, one sock still half tucked beneath the frame. The smell of laundry soap lingered, faint but familiar. His coat hung by the door, heavy and dark, the sleeves still creased where his arms always bent. I touched the fabric. It was cold. Untouched by morning, if he had left, he would have taken that coat. He hated the cold. Everyone knew that. The clock on the wall kept ticking, louder than it ever had. Each second landed hard, like it wanted me to notice. I remember thinking I should make breakfast anyway, keep the routine alive. But the pan stayed cold. The toast never went down. My body already knew something my mind was refusing to say. The knock came sooner than I expected. Too soon. Neighbors don't usually arrive before the sun has fully lifted itself off the fields. Mrs. Harlan stood on the porch with her arms crossed tight against her chest. Two others hovered behind her, their breath rising in small white clouds. No one asked if they could come in. They just did. Their boots left damp half-moons on the floor. "He's probably gone," she said gently, like she was offering comfort. "Boys like him don't stay." I watched her mouth shape the words. "Boys like him," as if she'd practiced saying it. On the walk over, as if it had already been agreed upon somewhere without me, another neighbor nodded. Someone else sighed. No one asked what he'd been wearing. No one asked when I'd last seen him. They talked about restlessness, about youth, about how small towns can feel too tight for young men. Their voices overlapped softly, like a choir that already knew the tune. I stood there, holding my son's coat in my hands, listening to a story being built without any of my words in it. When I didn't answer, Mrs. Harlan patted my arm. Her hand was warm, too warm. "He'll call," she said. "They always do." But the house stayed quiet. Too quiet. After they left, the silence settled deeper, like dust after footsteps fade. I noticed how the floorboards didn't creak the way they usually did. How even the wind outside seemed to pass by without touching the walls. It felt staged, like the world was waiting for me to accept the version it had already chosen. I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at the empty yard. The fence line, the pale winter grass lying flat under frost. Somewhere, a crow called once, then stopped. That was when I understood something small but sharp. If my son had run away, there would have been noise. There would have been mess. But this silence felt rehearsed. By mid-morning, the fog had burned off the road, but it clung to the town like it belonged there. I walked past the school first, the flag already raised, snapping softly in the cold. Children's voices floated through the brick walls, steady and ordinary. Life moving forward without waiting for mine to catch up. Inside the office, the secretary smiled when she saw me. Not a full smile, the kind you practice in the mirror. "He probably just needed space," she said, sliding a form toward me without asking why I was there. Her pen tapped twice on the desk, like punctuation. The bell rang, sharp and final, and the conversation ended itself. Outside, I stood on the steps longer than I meant to. The concrete was cold through my shoes. I watched a teacher guide a line of children inside, her hand firm on a boy's shoulder. She didn't look at me, not once. I crossed the street to the general store. The bell above the door chimed, too cheerful for the way my chest felt. Mr. Alden was behind the counter, counting change. He didn't stop when I walked in. "They don't stay, you know," he said, still looking down. "You raise them. Then they go." He said it like weather, like something you accept without arguing. I nodded, because nodding was easier than asking why no one had called me last night. Easier than asking if anyone had seen my son after dark. As I left, I noticed The flyer board by the door. Lost dog. Church supper. Snow closure notices from years ago. There was space for another paper. Clean and waiting. No one had put anything up. By noon, the story had already traveled further than I had. At the post office, Mrs. Green leaned across the counter and whispered like we were sharing something private. He always seemed restless. I searched her face for uncertainty, for concern. There wasn't any. She folded my mail neatly, aligning the edges with care. Order where it was easy, silence where it wasn't. Behind her, the wall clock ticked on, steady as law. At home, the phone didn't ring. I sat at the table with my hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold. I replayed the conversations in my head, noticing the way they fit together too cleanly. Same words, same pauses, same ending. Everyone knew what happened. No one wondered how. By afternoon, even friends spoke like witnesses repeating a statement. They meant well, I believe that, but they spoke in conclusions, not questions. They offered certainty like a blanket, tucking it in around me before I could push it away. I walked to the back window and looked out toward the road. Tire tracks cut through the frost, leading away, then disappearing. No footprints beside them, no signs of a hurry. That was when it settled in. Not grief, not yet, something colder. When truth disappears, people fill the space quickly. They smooth it over, they make it easier to step around. And in this town, everyone seemed relieved that the story required nothing more from them. I pressed my palm to the glass outside. The road stayed empty, and I understood then certainty had arrived far too early, and concern had never knocked at all. The fire had burned down to embers by the time I noticed them. Two boots, side by side, toes pointed toward the door, like they were waiting for someone to come back and step into them. The leather was dark with moisture, the laces loosened, the way he always left them. Heat from the stove rose slowly, patient, doing its quiet work. Mud still clung to the soles, thick, uneven, frozen in the shape of yesterday. I stood there longer than I should have, watching steam lift faintly from the rubber. The house smelled like wet earth and wood smoke. Winter smells, staying smells. I reached down and turned one boot slightly, just enough to see the tread. Packed dirt, small stones, proof of where he'd been and where he hadn't gone. If he had run, he would have taken these. He never went anywhere without them. Once the snow came, I remembered how he used to kick them off at the door, too tired to care where they landed. How I'd scold him gently, and how he'd smile without really apologizing. That smile came back to me then, sudden and unwelcome, the kind that arrives before you can stop it. The rest of the house carried on pretending. The clock ticked, the pipes whispered, a floorboard near the hallway creaked, like it remembered his weight. I waited for a sound from his room, a cough, a shift, anything, but the air stayed still. Later, when Mrs. Harlan stopped by again, her eyes dropped to the boots immediately. She noticed them. Of course she did. Everyone did. He must have changed shoes, she said after a moment. Her voice was soft, too quick. I watched her hands instead of her face. She folded them together, then unfolded them, then folded them again. She didn't touch the boots. She didn't ask about the mud. What shoes? I asked. She smiled. Not with her eyes. Oh, you know, she said, boys keep things all over. But my son didn't. Not really. He was careless in ways you could predict. He left messes where they made sense. And these boots, these were his winter, his ground, his way home when the roads turned cruel. After she left, I sat on the floor beside the stove. The heat pressed against my knees. I ran my thumb along the edge of the sole, feeling where the rubber met the leather. The mud was hard now, locked in place. That was when the question finally formed fully. Not loud, not angry, just clear. If the truth was so obvious, why did no one want me to look here? I thought about the way the story had already settled into the town. How easily it slid into place. A boy ran away. Case closed. No boots required. I stood and moved them slightly closer together. They made a small sound when they touched. Solid, real, unmistakably present. Outside, the wind dragged itself along the side of the house. Somewhere far off, metal clanged a gate, maybe. or something being shut. I left the boots where they were, drying, waiting, and for the first time, I understood that questions weren't dangerous on their own. It was who they threatened that mattered. The fence had been there longer than I could remember. Gray wood, split in places, leaning the way old things do when they've given up pretending to stand straight. Beyond it, the field stretched wide and quiet, pale under the winter sky. I stood at the edge of it one morning, my breath clouding the air, feeling that familiar hesitation settle into my chest. My son never liked this place. He'd said it more than once, always casually, always while walking a little faster past it. The ground feels wrong, he told me once. No drama, no explanation, just that. At the time, I'd laughed it off. Ground is ground. That's what I said. Now, standing there alone, I felt it too. Not fear exactly, something heavier, like the earth was holding its breath. The snow lay thin across the field, smooth and unbroken. Too smooth. The fence cast long shadows that reached toward me, dark fingers stretching over the white. I rested, my hand on one of the posts. The wood was rough, splintered, real, solid. The field beyond it felt different, quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful. As I stood there, a truck passed on the road behind me. I turned. Mr. Alden sat behind the wheel. He slowed when he saw me, lifted his hand halfway in greeting, then let it fall. His eyes flicked past me, toward the field, just for a second. Then he looked away. I started noticing it everywhere after that. At the post office, outside the school, conversations would drift, stall, then gently redirect, always away from that stretch of land. People's gazes slid toward it without meaning to, then snapped back like they'd touched something hot. And no one mentioned it. That was the strangest part. One afternoon, Mrs. Green walked with me partway home. We spoke about weather, about soup, about anything that wasn't important. As we reached a bend in the road, the field came into view. Her steps slowed. She didn't look at me. Not once. "You shouldn't go back there," she said softly. I stopped. "Why?" She adjusted her scarf, tightening it around her neck. Her hands shook just slightly. "It's just not good land," she said. Then she smiled, thin and practiced. "Never has been." She left after that, quickly. Her boots crunched fast over the snow. I stood there alone, the field stretching out in front of me like an unanswered question. I thought about my son's words again, the way he'd said them, calm, certain, like he'd felt something his body understood before his mind tried to argue. I took a step closer to the fence. The wind moved across the field in a low ripple, bending the grass beneath the snow. It sounded like a whisper, too spread out to catch words. That was when it settled in. Places don't carry weight on their own, they carry what's been left in them. I didn't cross the fence. Not yet. I wasn't ready for what might answer back if I did. I just stood there, memorizing the way the field looked when everyone pretended it wasn't watching. As I turned to leave, I felt it behind me, that quiet pull, the kind that doesn't ask, the kind that waits. The morning light didn't arrive all at once. It crept in, slow and pale, settling on the kitchen floor like it was unsure where to stop. I stood by the sink, rinsing the same cup twice, listening to the house breathe around me. No voice, no thought, just a feeling, steady and patient, pointing somewhere I hadn't yet named. No one told me to go to the field. That was the strangest part. Instead, it was the small things. The birds that gathered every morning along the fence line now stopped short, lifting suddenly, wings beating hard as if warned. The path I took each day felt longer, heavier, when it curved away from that direction. Even the snow seemed to behave differently there. It melted first, not fast, just early. I noticed it from the road, a thin, uneven patch of dark ground showing through while everything else stayed white. I slowed my steps without meaning to. My body knew before my mind asked why. The air felt colder there, sharper somehow, like it carried memory instead of weather. I told myself it meant nothing. Sun hits places differently. That's what people say. But silence had begun to act like a compass. I walked past the field twice that day without stopping. Each time, My head turned slightly, pulled. Each time, I kept going. The wind moved low across the grass, flattening it in waves, pointing inward. I felt watched, not by eyes, by waiting. That evening, I met Mrs. Harlan at the mailbox. She spoke quickly about nothing at all. Weather, groceries, the road needing salt. Her words trailed off when the field came into view. She didn't look at me. Instead, she stared straight ahead, jaw set tight, as if facing forward required effort. Her letters shook in her hands. "You all right?" I asked. She nodded. "Too fast. Best not wander," she said. "This time of year." Then she left. Didn't say where not to wander. Didn't have to. That night, sleep wouldn't come. The wind pressed against the windows again, harder now, like it was knocking with the flat of its hand. Somewhere in the dark, an animal cried out once, sharp, cut short. I sat up in bed, heart steady but alert, listening. Silence followed. Not empty. Full. I realized then that silence wasn't absence anymore. It had direction, weight, shape. It leaned toward the field the way a shadow leans when the sun is low. How long can instinct be ignored before it becomes regret? Before dawn, I put on my coat, didn't check the mirror, didn't turn on the light. The floor creaked beneath my steps, soft and familiar, like it was acknowledging a decision already made. Outside, the air stung my face awake. The sky was just beginning to change, that thin blue before color arrives. I stood at the edge of the yard and looked toward the field. The birds were gone. The ground waited. I didn't cross the fence. Not yet. But I stood there long enough to feel it, that quiet pull tightening, patient, certain. Like something that had learned my name and was simply waiting for me to answer. I turned back toward the house, my breath rising in small clouds. Behind me, the silence stayed, and I knew it wouldn't stop calling. The fence looked the same as it always had from a distance, gray wood, crooked lines, age showing itself without apology. But when I stood closer, I saw it one post leaning just slightly, like it had grown tired before the others. Not fallen, not broken, just off. Morning light skimmed the top of the field, thin and cold. Frost clung to the wire, turning it pale and brittle. I rested my hand on the fence rail, feeling the grain beneath my glove. The post nearest me was solid. So was the next. Then I reached the one that was N single quotes T.it moved. Just a little. The ground around it was darker than the rest, the snow thin there, patchy and uneven. When I pressed my boot down, it sank softer than it should have. Not mud, not ice, something disturbed, then left alone to pretend it hadn't been. The air felt heavier in that spot. Still. Listening. I stood there, breathing slow, my eyes tracing the shape of the earth. I remembered my son stopping here once, months ago, when summer still made the grass tall and stubborn. He'd leaned on this same fence, squinting out across the field. "Who owns this land?" he'd asked. I told him I didn't know, that it had always just been there. He waited a moment after that, like he expected someone else to answer. Someone never did. He nodded once and walked on, but his steps were slower than before. Standing there now, I understood why the question had stayed with me. The post wasn't marked. No sign. No boundary that explained itself. Just a quiet piece of ground everyone stepped around without saying why. I thought about how often that happens. How easy it is to leave questions unanswered when they don't belong to anyone. Footsteps crunched behind me. I didn't turn right away. Mr. Alden stood a few feet back, hands in his pockets. His breath rose in short bursts. He followed my gaze to the leaning post, then quickly away. "That one's always been like that," he said. "Always." That word again. I looked at him. He didn't look back. His eyes stayed fixed on the road, as if the field might pull him in if he met my stare. "Has it?" I asked. He shifted his weight. The snow complained softly under his boots. "Best not fuss with old ground," he said. "Things settle, then they don't." He left without saying goodbye. I crouched then, my knees aching as they bent. I brushed snow aside with my glove. The earth beneath was dark, damp, almost warm compared to everything around it. I pressed my palm flat against it and felt the give. Not much, just enough to notice. That was the moment something changed. Not fear. Recognition. This wasn't neglect. It was avoidance. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady, my eyes still on the post. I imagined my son here again, asking his question into the open air, waiting for an answer that never came. Why did no one answer him then? The fence creaked softly as the wind moved through it. The post leaned, patient and quiet, like it had been waiting for someone to finally notice. I stepped back from it, heart steady but heavy. Behind me, the road stayed empty. Ahead of me, the ground did not look away, and I knew this place remembered everything. The frost was still holding when I reached the fence. It glazed the wire thin and bright, catching the morning light the way glass does when it's trying to look innocent. From a distance, nothing seemed out of place. The field lay flat and pale. The posts marched along in a tired, familiar line. I almost turned back. Then I saw it, one post leaning, not fallen, just refusing to match the rest. I stepped closer. The air smelled of iron and damp soil. My breath came out slow, careful, as if the sound might disturb something. I wrapped my glove around the wood. The grain was rough, splintered, where years had worried it thin. When I pressed, the post shifted barely but enough to answer me. The ground there was darker, not frozen like the rest, soft, as if it had been worked and then left alone. I stood still, listening. The field made no sound. Even the birds had chosen other places to be. I thought of my son's boots by the stove, the mud packed hard into their soles, and how that mud hadn't come from here. Or maybe it had and I hadn't wanted to see it then. He'd stopped at this fence once, back when the grass reached his knees and summer made everything feel possible. He leaned on the wire and looked out across the field for a long time. "Who owns this land?" he asked. I remember the pause after, the way his question hung there, waiting for someone to claim it. I told him I didn't know, that it had always been this way. He nodded, but he didn't smile. He didn't push. He just walked on, slower, like he'd been handed something heavy without being told what it was. Standing here now, I felt the weight of that silence. A car passed on the road. Tires hissed against slush. I didn't turn. I watched the fence instead, counting the posts with my eyes. Straight, straight, straight. Then the one that leaned, subtle, stubborn, unmistakable. Footsteps crunched behind me. I knew who it would be. Mrs. Green stopped a few paces back. She didn't come closer. She didn't look at the post. Her scarf was pulled too tight around her neck. "You shouldn't linger," she said. I waited. "Why?" I asked. She pressed her lips together. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. "Anywhere but here. Ground like that doesn't like to be noticed," she said, then she left. No explanation, no goodbye. I crouched, knees protesting, and brushed the snow aside with my glove. The earth beneath was damp and dark, yielding under my palm. It held the shape of my hand longer than it should have. I felt a quiet certainty settle in my chest, not fear, not anger, recognition. This wasn't neglect. It was permission given long ago, and never questioned. I stood and stepped back, my gaze lifting to the field beyond the fence. The wind moved across it in a low ripple, bending what little grass showed through. The leaning post creaked softly, answering the motion like it had been waiting for company. I thought of my son again, of his question, of the way no one answered him. Some questions don't go unanswered because they're hard. They go unanswered because the truth has been standing there the whole time. I turned toward the road, leaving the fence behind me. The post stayed leaning, and I knew, with a calm I didn't trust yet, that the ground would not forget even if the town had tried. The morning was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, not peaceful, measured. The sky hung low and colorless, like it had decided not to interfere. I stood at the edge of the field with the shovel resting against my leg, its handle cold through my glove. Somewhere behind me, the town was waking up, doors opening, kettles heating, lives continuing. None of that reached me here. The earth in front of me looked ordinary. That was the cruelest part. I pressed the shovel down. The ground resisted at first, then softened, giving way with a sound that felt too intimate. Wet, heavy. I worked slowly, not because I was tired, but because rushing felt disrespectful. Each lift of soil landed beside the hole with a dull thud, darker than it should have been. The smell came next. Not sharp, old. I stopped breathing through my nose without thinking. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. My body had already chosen stillness. Somewhere deep, something in me had stepped forward and said, "This is it." Mothers know before there are words for knowing. The shovel struck something that wasn't earth. Not stone. Not root. The sound was wrong, hollow, muted, final. I rested my hands on the handle and closed my eyes for just a moment. Not to pray, just to gather myself into one place. I knelt then, setting the shovel aside. My gloves brushed soil away carefully, almost tenderly. The ground resisted, reluctant, as if it had been asked to keep this secret for too long. It gave it back slowly. A corner, a shape. Enough. I didn't scream. I didn't faint. I sat back on my heels, the cold soaking through my coat, and stared at what the earth had chosen to return. There was no shock left to have, only confirmation, the kind that settles heavy and undeniable. The wind moved across the field, lifting loose dirt, carrying it away like it wanted distance. I noticed how quiet everything was. No birds, no road noise. Even the town felt far, like it had stepped back on purpose. I thought of all the mornings I'd stood at my kitchen window, looking out toward this land. How many people had passed it every day without stopping? How many had known, or guessed, or decided not to ask, how could the town live beside this? I imagined conversations that ended early, glances exchanged and redirected, certainty offered too quickly, silence practiced until it felt like truth. This wasn't one person's secret. It was shared, maintained, protected by routine. I covered what I could, not to hide it again, but to keep it safe until the right voices arrived. My hands moved with care, the way they had when my son was small. When every touch mattered, I stood slowly, my knees aching, my breath steady. The field looked different now, not because it had changed, but because it had been honest. As I turned toward the fence, I saw the town beyond it. Roof lines, smoke rising, ordinary shapes holding extraordinary distance. I knew what I had to do next, but I also knew this: the earth had done its part. It had remembered. And now, so would I the second time they came. There were no sirens, just two cars easing onto the shoulder, tires crunching softly over gravel. The morning was gray again, familiar in its restraint. I watched from the porch as doors opened and closed with care, like even the metal had learned to speak quietly. They walked toward me slower this time. No assumptions, no rehearsed ending. One of them nodded. Another removed his hat and held it in both hands. The field sat behind them, unremarkable from here, doing its best to look like it always had. I noticed how none of them stood with their backs to it.